Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The police operation to end the siege at Normandy Church has now been revealed in new footage when two attackers murdered an elderly priest while he was leading yesterday's morning prayers. More details are emerging about the killers, both thought to be 19 years old. One had been on a police watch list, the other had tried twice to reach Syria to fight with so-called Islamic State. As we go on air, the Amaq news agency is reporting that IS has posted video of two men it claims are the attackers, pledging allegiance to the group's leader. Porrick O'Brien has this report.
The utter incongruity of yesterday's attack, filmed on a phone. Morning birdsong outside. Inside the quintessential French parish church, the unspeakable has happened. The man with the mobile trying to make sense of it.
Ça a tiré. Il y a l'armée et tout.
By now, 85-year-old Father Jacques Hamel has been murdered.
Il y a quelqu'un qui a crié Allah Akbar dans l'église, oui.
At this point, a 19-year-old local, Adel Kamish, and another assailant are still alive. As well as killing the priest, they've critically wounded another. And they have hostages.
Il y a des explosifs, les mecs.
One of the hostages is released. Then things accelerate. We hear a series of muted bangs.
Ouais, ils viennent de dire qu'il y avait deux personnes de décédées, c'est chaud.
More details have emerged about the 19-year-old killer Adel Kamish. Tried to join IS in Syria twice, detained and sent back twice, released in March on bail, made to wear an electronic tag. Today, the judge who heard his case said Kamish decided to fight Jihad at home as revenge because his attempts to do so in Syria were foiled. This is where the teenager lived with his mother. She was interviewed upon his return from Syria last year. She said the Charlie Hebdo massacre changed him. Terror begetting terror.
The killing of Charlie Hebdo acted as a detonator. He spoke with words that did not belong to him. He was bewitched, like a cult.
On his attempts to travel to Syria, she added,
Fortunately, we managed to catch him twice. If he managed to get to Syria, I'd write off my son. I want to know who messed up our child.
In the town of Saint-Étienne-du-Rouvray, Father Jacques baptized, married, buried generations in this town. At the other end of the hierarchy, the Pope, on a visit to Poland today, paid tribute to Father Jacques. He also talked of a world at war, but not, he said, a religious one. All the world's religions, he said, wanted peace. Later, he broached again what he described as the complex phenomenon of migration and reiterated his call for a spirit of readiness to welcome those fleeing. Earlier, the Archbishop of Paris shoulder to shoulder with Muslim leaders. He spoke of the terrorist culture of death and the propaganda of nihilism. Cue a debate in the French media. The news channel BFM and the Le Monde newspaper decided not to broadcast pictures of the killer. A memorial mass for Father Jacques has just finished in the grandeur of the Notre Dame Cathedral. But outside, in a country hit so many times, turning the other cheek is turning to tough talk on security.
Well, joining us now from Paris is Corinne Narassiguin. She is the spokeswoman for President Hollande's Socialist Party. Corinne Narassiguin, to what extent do you think the security services let France down in the course of the Normandy issue, given that they knew so much about these two men?
Well, we'll have to see what the inquiry says exactly about the judicial process. We know that the counterterrorism team had put these young men under surveillance, and they were one of them was on probation with an electronic bracelet, and this was a decision by a judge. So we'll have to see if those procedures need to be tightened or if we need to take measures specific to youngsters or anyone who is suspected of terrorism, even if we have no proof of them being actually involved in a plot, which is really where the difficulty lies, because we cannot start putting people in prison without actual proof. And this is where we as democracies in general, not just France, have to find the right balance between protecting our individual liberties and respecting the rule of law and ensuring security. And
Right.
it's a very tough balance, a very narrow path to find.
But you mentioned the word democracy, and democracy is at the heart of this issue, is it not? In the sense that France is revealed as a deeply divided country. I mean, Nice, Paris, Normandy, and that's only 3 of the incidents. And in each, one's talking about people who come from alienated communities that have never really been in the mainstream of the society that is France.
I don't want to make these kind of generalizations. I think most populations, most French citizens who have foreign descent are actually, most of them, well integrated. They feel French. They do believe in the French Republic. But there's a minority of them that obviously can be easily manipulated into with this very powerful propaganda that the Islamic State is throwing out there on the internet.
But forgive me, I mean, for example, if you look at Paris, here is a city in which really those people from ethnic minorities, particularly from North Africa, are out in the suburbs, and very many of them very poor suburbs, whilst the French elite exist in the middle of the city in some considerable splendor.
Well, I don't think the divide is so clear-cut. Obviously, there are a lot of discriminations that we must fight against, and there's a lot of people from ethnic minorities who do suffer from these discriminations for access to jobs and good jobs and housing, and this is absolutely something that we need to continue to work on, which means that the answer is cannot just be about security. It has to be about all of us working together, and not just the state, but also the businesses, the education system, our communities. But you see, I mean, have to see that some of these youngsters actually in the past who have committed acts of terrorism or who have gone to Syria were actually well integrated from families, or some of them were well off. So
right.
It's not so clear-cut, unfortunately.
But this also throws a light on President Hollande himself, on the Socialist Party too. To what extent are they competent, really, to continue governing France?
What we have done more than any government has done in terms of fighting against discrimination, and we will continue to do that, and in terms of strengthening our laws for intelligence services, giving more means to the justice system and the police. And this is something that didn't start in 2012 when François Hollande became president. This is an issue that started years ago, and it will take years to resolve, unfortunately. And France is not the only country that has known terrorism. Just over the past few days, we've seen at least 2 acts of terrorism linked to ISIS in Germany.
Right.
So we see that this is a challenge, and we've seen acts of terrorism also recently in the United States. Mm-hmm. So we know that this is a challenge for all democracies today.
Well, Corinne Nanasagan, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Paris. Thank you. Kathy.
Well, the latest attack in France has raised important questions not only for the authorities and politicians, but also for the mainstream media. How should terrorist attacks be reported? Well, in a radical shift in its editorial policy, the French newspaper Le Monde has declared it will no longer publish photos of perpetrators, extended propaganda documents, or the claims of so-called Islamic State to prevent them being glorified. In an editorial, the paper's director, Jérôme Fenolio, explained, without an aware attitude from companies who control social networks or mass media, it will be increasingly difficult to stand up to the after effects of the hatred strategy. And these thoughts, debates, or adjustments to the practices of an enemy who reverse against us the tools of our modernity are essential to win, to break this hatred strategy. But the move has sparked widespread debate among journalists and policy experts, with some labelling it a great decision, while others say it sets a very interesting precedent for media in the West. Well, another media organisation which has said it will no longer publish photographs of terrorists is the news network Europe 1. Earlier, I spoke to its editor-in-chief. He began by telling me how his organisation is going further still in its editorial policy towards terrorism.
We decided not to name the terrorists because I had a bad feeling in the last Nice attack, because we named the terrorist, but we didn't give a name to all the victims. And yesterday night, when we heard about the name of the guys who made the shooting in the church, I decided that it was enough. And I decided that giving their name was a way to glorify their act. So I think we can do differently. We can present who they are. We can give a lot of information without giving their name.
I completely understand the trauma you feel in France at what has happened. But surely it's not the business of the media to fight the battles that are really the battles of the government.
I don't pretend we are fighting. I don't pretend we are doing a kind of heroic act. I don't pretend anything of all of that. I just think that we can, in a way, stop to glorify all those people who try to destabilize our country. I can tell who they are, I mean, where they're from, their age, their religion, what was their childhood, but I don't have to give their name.
Doesn't it make a mockery of it, though, when all the details, far too many details for comfort for many, are all over the internet? Yes, I mean,
of course, maybe we are only the radio, a few TV, and some websites to decide not to name the terrorists, but it is just a question of morality, I think. And I don't judge I don't judge the other media that decided to continue to name the terrorists, but I do it because I think it's right.
Surely it's not the job of the media to take a moral judgment. It's the job of the media to report the news.
I still decide to report the news. I still decide to report who are the terrorists. I decide not to give the name because it's my decision, and because I think, from my point of view, that giving the name is a way to glorify them. And I don't think that giving the name is an information in itself.
Clearly,
I'm doing it totally freely.
Clearly, every attack is a personal tragedy, many personal tragedies. What effect do you think the continuation of these attacks is having on the media in terms of how people understand these attacks and how the media reports them, in terms of the familiarity with this kind of terrorism?
Yes. This is a very interesting issue and question, because unfortunately, since the past 18 months, French public opinion is getting used to all of that. And I understand that, you know, when the first attack happened in Paris 18 months ago, it was a shock during maybe 2 or 3 weeks. After the Paris attacks on the 13th of November, the shock lasted maybe 10 days, and now it's getting lower and lower. I mean, after Nice, we spoke about Nice attack only 5 days after, and after another attack happened. So it's very difficult to deal with that issue, and with the fact that the public opinion is unfortunately used to it.
Nicolas Escalante, thank you very much for joining us. At least 48 people have been killed in a twin bombing in the Syrian town of Qamishli near the Turkish border. The militant Islamic State group have claimed they were behind the attack. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, joins me now. Lindsay, just coming off the back of that discussion about censorship and what the media covers, I mean, in a way, there's accusations that the media already chooses which terrorist attacks they give big coverage to and which not. I mean, let's take this one, for example.
Well, I think there's an argument that we've become inured to the horrendous terrorist attacks which are going on all the time in Syria and Iraq. And we do put more emphasis on what happens for us, closer to home. You take this attack today. This was a massive explosion in Qamishli. It was so big that you could hear that windows were broken across the border in Turkey. It seems to have been aimed at a police station, which is held by the Syrian Democratic Forces. They're mainly Kurdish, backed by the Americans. We're talking about, up to 50 killed and many more injured. Islamic State claimed it almost immediately. Why is that? Look, it's the same as the reason that we're seeing this stuff in Europe. They're under huge pressure, both in Iraq and Syria. Forces approaching their headquarters in Iraq, Mosul, and a lot of pressure on them in their headquarters in Syria, Raqqa. So they're lashing out. They're lashing out in Europe, and they are lashing out in Syria and Iraq. And the numbers of dead and injured are horrifying.
And you've been covering what's going on in Aleppo very closely. What is the situation there now?
Well, what you have there is the Syrian government and the Russians closing in on rebel forces who are not Islamic State. They're different rebel forces. And the aid agencies have put out a plea because they're really anxious now. 300,000 people under siege. Today, the Syrian forces said that they had cut off the Castello road. That's the last road into that rebel-held area. That's the last lifeline for food and medicine. They've also been attacking. They attacked a food store. They've attacked 5 health facilities. So we're talking about people who very soon will have no food and no medical facilities. And that, of course, is one of the reasons why we're still seeing refugees fleeing Syria. That's another pressure on Europe. It all comes back to the war in Syria and the wars in Iraq. And that's why Europe is under these pressures now.
Lindsay, thanks very much.
I've been